Hmm. Let's see if this even works. Oh, goodness. I'm not certain that I am even live. The internet barely works. We are in London. I'm going to do a pulse check, and if not, we're leaving this up to the internet. Oh my goodness. Okay, it might be up. Potentially. Can't tell. Okay, we've got a comment, which means apparently the live is working. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours with Amber. I'm Amber. This is Office Hours. January went off with a smashing success. I was able to complete one full month of the learning dynamic arrays, applying them to the pricing quoting tool, completely rebuilding it, and actually worked really phenomenally. Got feedback from Liana Garish, had a wonderful interview with her week 3. Jack, thank you so much for confirming the live is working. And then week 4, we did a community call where we had a bunch of folks from the Office Hours with Amber community come together and talk through our goals, roadblocks, etc. So that was really nice. I'm going to post a kind of recap clip of that soon. But overall, January went really well. Now, I hope my audio is working. If it's not, 1 frame per second. Okay. Damn. Let me see which Wi-Fi I'm on. I'm on the Loft 2.4 gigahertz. Okay. Well, if the live cuts out, just know I tried my best. There's no Ethernet cables here. Today, I am in London. It is midnight. I'm feeling very silly for not canceling this week, but I'm committed to my goals. So yeah, I'm going to watch some YouTube videos. I have no idea if they're going to work because the internet is really doing the most here, but I'm going to be using Full Stack Modeler. I'm going to be using Full Stack Modeler to go through their Power Query segment. They've got, I think, 7 or 8 videos, and so I'm going to start with that. And then, yeah, preliminarily, my understanding of, God, the drop rate is 80%. God, that is really bad. I think I'm going to cut the stream, switch Wi-Fis, and come back because this is really heinous. Well, now it's saying it's excellent. Who knows, man? I'm just going to keep rolling. And if it doesn't record, it doesn't record. But if it drops again, I think I'm probably going to switch Wi-Fis. But whew, we're trying our best, guys. Okay. Power Query. I've done some projects with it before. The goal this month is to learn more of the deep dives. Melissa DeCourt did a beautiful presentation in Vegas, going through kind of the deep depths of what you can do with it. And so after being inspired of what I could do, that inspired me to keep learning about it. Good. Okay. That's good to hear. If it gets choppy, I have no idea, guys. The internet gods were like, she's about to give up on her goals. And I was gonna. Okay. Also, Harry, thank you so much for being here. Dedicated supporter of Officers Amber, as always. I'm very excited for you guys with the launch of the UK chapter of FMWC and MEWC. Fuck, it's dropped again. I'm gonna freak out. Okay, I'm gonna swap Wi-Fi's. Okay, we're gonna see if this works. We're going to say a little prayer to the internet gods. So far, I switched to the different Wi-Fi, so God bless. Okay. Pending none of that recorded before. Essentially, this month is February. My goal in February is to learn more about Power Query. I have a preliminary understanding about Power Query. I'm a big button clicker. After Melissa DeCourt's presentation in the Microsoft Excel World Championships training sessions in Vegas, infinitely inspired. So I'm going to watch some stuff, and I hope that the YouTube loads and the OBS loads and everything loads, and it's going to be great. But we're going to hang out until the Wi-Fi gives up. So mic's cutting. Brilliant. Okay, well, it's not important to hear me. We're just here for the vibes. All right.
Because I'm not a coder. I don't like VBA. It's not where I'm happy. It's you know, my safe space is native Excel, and I do have to be pushed quite hard to leave it. But you know, once he got me there and he ran through some of the basic training.
Which the funniest part about doing full stack modeler views now is that Giles is in the next room over, and so it feels a little creepy. It's like, hey, listening to you. Ugh.
Steps with me probably 2 years ago now. I just haven't looked back because it's a no-brainer once you're comfortable with the editor and you understand what you can do. And then the nice thing is you have to do no coding if you don't want to. So this is really just an introduction, and what I want to go through first before we even look at Excel is just sort of to step back a little bit and think about what it is we're doing here and the environment that we're in, and to just think a little bit about that in terms of financial modeling versus data analytics. And then we'll just go through a few key terms that we're going to be using quite a lot over the next few videos. So as we did before, I'm going to start off in this module going through basics once we're done with these slides. We'll move on to some top features then. So the idea for all of this really isn't to show you every single feature. It's just to hone you in on the ones that we think are most appropriate for you. And then we'll move on to some case study work. And it's really important here in particular to say that we're always going to be looking at this with the application to financial modeling in mind. You know, Power Query is one of those topics that does lend itself very nicely into data analytics. And apart from sort of touching on those subjects to make it clear the different environments you can go in, the different routes you can go down with data and analytics versus modeling, we're not going to go into the training of those topics. And you'll remember this slide from the Excel tables module, and I just want to recap on this again. Remember we talked about the fact that when we look at Excel tables, pivot tables, Power Query, there's doing stuff with these tools that is quite local data analytics. And then there's, for me, what is more broad data management. And that's where we're going here. This is about getting data from internal, as in within your workbook, or external sources, doing things to that data, quite powerful things now, transforming it, and that can be enrichment, better, merging, worse, whatever ugly. It is, and then doing something with that data, loading it somewhere.
And also, Jack, you're so right. I've heard plenty enough of Giles today. I was hoping that Miles would be leading the Power Query training, but unfortunately, here we are.
Exporting it, using it in some way. And the great thing about Power Query is that when you create these queries, hopefully without any coding involved, but you can go there if you want to. There's an M code language behind Power Query. Then all of the steps that you create are recorded. It acts a bit like macros and VBA in that sense that
Not
you can
jumping is a good thing,
automate
or
the steps. And once you get that right, it just saves you an unbelievable amount of time. And before we move over to Excel, let's just cover some key terms. So firstly, when I talk about queries, we're talking about these steps, these sets of steps that are grouped together that perform particular actions, and they're recorded, so they're repeatable. And you can do this within the query editor through the use of all of the features and buttons that they have there, not by writing code, but you can write code if you want to. Connections, so data
Perfect. Thank you,
connections
Jack.
within your workbook to external sources. And when we look in Excel, you'll see these two terms badged together a lot, queries and connections. And then we're going to look at the query editor. So this is where you manage these queries. And it does look like something outside of Excel. I mean, to be honest, it is separate to native Excel. You are dealing with your data in a separate area, and you're not actually having any impact on the source data itself. And then the advanced editor is an area within the query editor that for those of you that do need to do some coding and create some bespoke steps, this is where you would do that. Although you can also do some coding, tweaks to coding in the formula bar in the query editor. So that's all I wanted to cover on screen now. What we're going to do is get stuck straight in again, and we'll start walking through the basics of where you go to find. So here we are back in Excel, and you've got a very familiar data set. I hope if you've been following this journey step by step in front of you, it's our leads and events data. And what we're going to do in this video is just focus on the left-hand side of the data ribbon. We're going to look at these options: get and transform data, and then queries and connections. And this left-hand side is all about pulling your data into the Power Query editor. If we look at the drop down here in Get Data, you can see that there are lots of different options we have available to us in terms of ways that we can pull data into the model. We tend to use Power Query pulling data from other workbooks. We tend to use it pulling from folders. But what we're going to start off doing is actually just pulling data into the editor from our local Excel files, so from a table and a range. And because I've got my active cell on a table, it's going to know to pick up.
Jody, since you just made it, today's going to be a very simple video. I'm just going to watch some Power Query videos. I'm not going to talk a lot because everyone's sleeping, except for Jack. So sorry you're awake for this. Yeah. I'm tired, but we're committing to the goal, committing to the bit. So we're just gonna watch some videos. So thanks for coming. Yeah, it's midnight in England, so I'm a little sleepy girl, but life moves on.
That table into the editor. It's worth us just taking our time here if you're not familiar with this screen. But there are parts that look like Excel. So for example, we have ribbons along the top. We have individual buttons that perform actions across those ribbons. We have what looks like a formula bar at the top here, although obviously the formula that you can see there as an example is clearly different. But then we've got a section over on the right-hand side here. We have a section that's collapsible on the left-hand side here. And we have what, again, looks similar to Excel, but is clearly slightly different. But it's a view that in some way seems to be holding that data from the table that we just brought through earlier. So where do we start? Let's start on the right-hand side. This is the query editor section here. So you can see that you can name your query, and because we brought through a table, the editor has used that table name as the default. We'll come on to best practice.
I'm so sorry, but I appreciate you being on to
name
help
of the
me
query. That's not the
troubleshoot
table
some
name, that's the
things,
query name.
but absolutely.
And then here we've got a section called applied steps, and there are 2 steps in there already.
Gorgeously.
And I'm not going to go into what those individual steps are, but this is where the actions that you perform. So when you're in this editor, the moment you start performing any actions, whether it's clicking buttons here, you'll see all the options where you can do that as we go through these videos. Those steps, those actions are recorded. And let me just give you an example of one of those steps being applied. And I'm not going to worry too much about the actual position or the step that I take or I make here. It's just to give you an example. So I've got the market date column highlighted, and I've got a remove columns button here on the home ribbon. And I'm going to click this to remove the column. You can see it moving away from there. And on the right-hand side, we have a new step called remove columns. And we can rename this step to anything we want to. We can move back a step just by clicking on the previous step in this list. And you can see that the market date column comes back. So I can step between the steps just by clicking through these, which is incredibly flexible and just really useful. If I want to delete that step, if I'm not happy with it, I can just click the cross button there, and that step disappears altogether. As we get into this, we'll look a little bit at the formula bar, because you can also see that with each step, the underlying code is available to us here. The underlying code is also available to us from the advanced editor. And this is where you can go in and do some bespoke coding if you want to, but this is not my comfort zone at all, and I try to keep out of there as much as I can. On the left-hand side, we have this queries section, and this is where all of your individual queries will be held. At the moment, we just have the one query, and you can see that it's got the name of the query here. If I was even just to change this to QRY, you'll see that the query name has changed. Now, as we get on to more advanced use of the Power Query editor, you'll see that we take great care to order and structure our queries, and it's all part of this ethos that we'll come back to time after time throughout this journey, that we're trying to keep things simple. The complexity, if it's unnecessary, is not clever. So let's now have a look at each of these ribbons, and we'll start off with the one that you're probably going to turn to the least, and that's the View ribbon. So the View ribbon offers you a number of different ways to see the data that we've got here in Power Query, and we'll just touch on some of these. Monospaced is an interesting option, I quite like it, so if we click that, you'll see the formatting of the data here change, and this does align the letters quite nicely across the rows. The formula bar on the left-hand side is what makes this appear, and I would always suggest you have that ticked. It is really handy as you go through these steps to just be able to make little tweaks every now and then if you do need to go into the code without having to go into the advanced editor. You can also bring up more information about the data in your columns, in your fields, which again, I think is quite handy. This will, by default, just profile the top 1,000 rows, but you can click here and you can get the profiling based on the entire data set. Just be a little bit careful because large data sets will slow your model down. You can also access the advanced editor as you could from the home page from here, and query dependencies is a really useful tool. Not so much at the moment where we've just got one query, but eventually if we had a network of queries in here, you would get a really nice relationship, a dependencies diagram that just helps you step back and get a bird's eye view of what it is you're doing. So that's all we'll cover in this video. I think this is a good time to pause. What we'll come on to in the next video is a closer look at the other three ribbons, Home, Transform, and Add Columns, because this is where you're going to be doing most of your work to enrich and to manipulate your data set in Power Query.
I think I'll be happy with today if I can get through all these videos. Really, honestly, most of these I already know. I just want to make sure that I can get through like the basic videos so that I'm not, because a lot of times if you skip the basic videos, let's just have a
Okay, so we're starting off in native Excel again, only quickly, partly because I just wanted to show you again that process of taking a table of data into the Power Query editor. But also, I wanted you to see that when we get into the editor, because this is now the second time I've brought through this table of data, you'll see that it's actually set it up as a second query, even though it's from the same source data. So let's go ahead and do that, and then we can walk through some of the key features in Power Query as well. Right, so we are back in the Power Query editor and back in this new layout that hopefully you're slightly more familiar with
The
after the
mic's
last video.
gone again?
So we've got our query here. This is you can see again, this is started with the table name because I brought through that table from Excel. It's already applied a couple of steps, which we'll talk through later. And you'll also notice on the left-hand side now, because I essentially went back into Excel and I brought this table through again, it's set it up as a separate query. So you can start to just get a feel for, over on this left-hand side, as we add more queries, then this list is going to grow. So if we look at the Home ribbon first, some of the features that we have across here are repeats. So they are also found if you take the Transform section, for example. You'll see most of those features somewhere along here as well on this ribbon. But I'm guessing the thinking is that these are just some of the most commonly used and they make them even more easily available on that Home ribbon for you. We've got some functionality here to make adjustments to columns and rows. And in particular, what I find myself using is this Remove Columns feature, and it's got a drop down, and you can actually choose to either remove the highlighted columns here or remove all other columns. And just to show you, I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory. If I click Remove Columns, you see that the column that I had highlighted, Market Data, has been removed. And if I do that again, I've got Market Data highlighted, remove other columns, every other column gets removed. Okay, you've also got in Sort a lot of the functionality that you have in text to columns in native Excel. So you can start to pull apart your data in your individual fields based on a number of factors.
There it is.
Most of you are probably quite familiar with this if you've used text to columns before.
Okay.
And next we've got a section
I'm
here
so
called Combine, where
annoyed
you can
with
merge
myself.
queries and you can append queries. And I'm not going to go into that in this
Today's
video,
not it,
but this is
guys.
one of those features that
We're
is
committed
just so
to doing
powerful
it,
in Power Query.
but
This
we're
is all to
doing
do
it
with
really
bringing
ugly today.
individual queries together and doing something with it. And it's called Combine, so you can see that this is about combining your queries, and there's so much value to be got from that section. Parameters, again, that is a slightly more advanced topic, so we will come on to this at some point. It may be that we also do some live sessions around parameters, because that's stepping up to a slightly more advanced level of Power Query. And the section on the right-hand side just allows you to bring in and manage data sources. Next, we're going to look at the remaining two ribbons, Transform and Add Column. But one thing that I've struggled with a little bit at times is actually just that
We're
thought
on our
process of
own
which of
version
those
of
two
the
ribbons do I
error
turn to when I'm
store
doing something
today.
or I want to do something to my data. And actually, now that I've thought through it enough times, it is really simple, but it's worth just highlighting. The difference is that transforming data will actually make adjustments to whatever that data field is that you have highlighted, whereas the Add Column ribbon will essentially often use the data that you have highlighted, but it's going to create a new column to give you those results. And let me give you an example. Let's take the cost. I think we have here, event cost. And what I'm going to do is go to the Transform ribbon, and let's just say that I want to multiply that event cost value by something. Let's multiply it by 100. Now, because I've gone to the Transform ribbon to do this, you can see that it's just updated the original column. No new column has been added, and we've got the step here, multiply column.
Jeff,
so
you are
there's
so
the original.
right. Thank
This is
you
the same
for
column,
your
but the
words of
values have been adjusted.
encouragement, because
Now, if I go
I'm
to the
feeling
Add
really
Column
bad about
ribbon,
this.
you'll find the same feature, the same button, and now I can go to multiply by 100. But this time it's added a new column at the end, inserted multiplication. So that really is the fundamental difference between those two ribbons. And I think the reason why
So what he just said, like the multiplication, is such a simple step, but like I would have created a custom column and referenced it that way, which I guess he gets to in his own way. So like it's good, like it's good to know that you could do it both ways, because I didn't know this other way that he's doing it right now. I like don't know when I'd use it, but like good to know it exists, I suppose.
Often found it quite confusing was because a lot of the features, a lot of the buttons look the same. So just keep that in mind before you even go into either of those ribbons for whatever it is you're trying to do. So let's get rid of that step that I've just added, and we're on the transform ribbon at the moment. Now, again, there are some features in here that I don't want to come onto yet because they're slightly more advanced. I just want to look for now at the easier ones. So we saw a moment ago, we've got things like these split columns features here. You can format your fields. You can extract data from your fields based on certain criteria. You can do things in terms of calculations here. But again, remember, because we're in the transform ribbon, that is going to change the underlying field that you have here. Not the underlying data in Excel, just the original field here in Power Query. And then there's a lot of functionality around dealing with dates, which will come in very, very handy as you get into more complex challenges that you face with modeling and dates and times. And the add column ribbon is very similar. So you see lots of features here where you can format your data fields, you can make adjustments, you can add calculations, you can do the same functionality that we just looked at for dates and times. So they are very, very similar ribbons. I have to just show you one feature that I get far too excited about all the time, and that is column from...
See, the funny thing is, you see how I don't know if you can see my mouse, but up here, the statistics, standard, scientific, trigonometry, that section, it's like always grayed out. And even when I'm dealing with, let me grab the link for, like, even when I'm dealing with, like, numbers, it doesn't feel like it's actually working. Or, like, it doesn't open. I'm not sure if this link works. I don't know. I feel like it's always grayed out, even when I'm like on like I think I was just having a stroke just now, but even when I'm on like values column or like something that's just like all numbers, I can't use the statistics or standard or scientific or whatever, or it'll only give me count. Probably user error, something for me to figure out later.
From examples. I absolutely love this, and I'll show you why. So this works a little bit like flash fill in native Excel, and I've got market date highlighted. Let me just go to employee and I'll show you what this can do. So with the employee field highlighted, I'm going to select from the selection because it's that column, that field that I want to make an adjustment to, and then I get this new column on the right hand side, and this is where I need to enter an example of what the end result I want looks like. And I'm just going to run an example where I want to pull out the surname from that employee field. So if I type Clark in there, hit enter, you'll see that Power Query has then interpreted my result and it's performed that action across my whole field. I can now click OK, and this is what I really like about it, is that Power Query creates that as a new field, but also gives me the code. It gives me the M code in the formula bar. So if I was interested in learning that M code, I think that's quite a unique way to do it because you can go in. It won't work in all cases because it may not get the exact steps that you're looking for. It may not interpret the result quite right. But what a great way to get into coding by actually giving examples of the result you want and then seeing what the coding is that you would need to get to those steps if you're building it up from scratch. So that's just a quick run through some of the basic features. What I'm going to do in the next video is I'm going to go to a different data source and it's going to be slightly messier, and I'm going to go through some examples of me bringing that data in and then doing some of the basic cleanup work that you tend to do with raw data.
Okay. I think, let's see if my audio, okay, my audio is still connected. The column from examples I didn't know about, and I like it. It's one of those things that, like, again, it's important to go back to the basics because you find out stuff like this that has been under my nose the whole time because I just never took the time to just click the button and try it. Annoyed with myself, but we're here, we're learning. Now, updating and refreshing, I am the master, I would say, self-proclaimed master of data refreshing and live data connections, because copy and pasting is, let's say it together, beneath us. So I'll be interested to see if there's any new things I can learn from this. However, I will not be demoing any of the Excel today because I don't have the mental beans on me. Ooh.
Before you move into a set of videos that are going to be dealing with pulling data from different places, different sources, there's one process that I want to just walk through with you, because what you're going to find in the next few videos is some supporting files, and some of those are starting files, some of them are solutions files. And for some of them, in particular the solutions files, when you download them and open them up on your computer, they're not going to work. You're going to go into the editor and you will find that there is an error message. And that will be because the source, the address that the source is linked to, will be to the computer that the file was originally created on, not yours. But that gives us a really good opportunity to just go through the steps of changing a source and refreshing data in the Power Query editor, which is what I'm going to do now from one of the solution files that's coming up. So in here, I'm going to go back into the editor. And what you'll see as soon as I get into the editor is that we have an issue. I've got a warning message, an error message, and it says could not find a part of the path. And it's looking for this file on my desktop in PQ files for this file called Power Query example data CSV. Now I know why that's happened. It's because I've deliberately changed the folder name and removed the S on the end of files. But this is just the example of what I wanted to show you. So we have an issue here, and you can see if I step back through all of the steps that we're going to create in the video that's coming up, I have to go all the way back to the source. And it's here that we've got the issue. Now to change the source, I can actually just click on the cog on the right-hand side here. And you can see that it's giving me a very easy way to change this. If I just click on the browse button, I can go to the desktop. It's actually already there, but let's just step back. I can go to my desktop, double click on the PQ file folder, and then I can double click on the destination of the file that I want it to be linked to. Click OK, and there you go, that has updated. And you can see now that I've got no issues all the way through here. Now what you can also do when you're making changes like this to your steps or changing the links, and I do this sometimes just to put my own mind at ease, is you can come over on the left here on the home ribbon and click refresh preview. And that just makes sure that you've got the latest data and that it's been applied with those latest steps. So that's all I wanted to show you in this short video. When you open up those files in the following lessons, if you see that error message, go to the source, click on the cog on the right hand side, and you just have to find the appropriate file or folder that you need to make those files work.
Using locale.
Another quick heads up for some of you before you get stuck into a lot of the detailed exercise work. Everything that you see with our files and everything that you'll see on the recordings is based on a regional language setting, and that's UK or English brackets United Kingdom. So for some of you, if you're not using that setting as a default, then you may come across some errors that you have to deal with because, for example, with dates, it's picking up the month and the day in a different order. Now there's two ways you can approach this. You can actually change your underlying regional setting for your workbook. And you do this by going to File, from the Power Query Editor, Options and Settings, Query Options. And then you get this list here. And what I want to go to is current workbook, regional settings, and I can change the default language basically for the entire workbook here to English United States or whatever else it might be. But actually what you'll be doing more often when you're picking up a particular data source, if you want to keep your regional settings, but you just need the data to be referenced a different way or interpreted a different way, then you can also do that for an individual field. And you go back to the field drop-down list here for data type, and at the bottom you'll find using locale as a setting. When you click on that option, you then get these two drop-downs here. So you can choose for a date to pick a different local setting just for that field of data. So another heads up, for many of you, if you're using English United Kingdom as your default setting, then you'll be absolutely fine. If you do come across this issue, those are the two ways that you may be able to fix it for your local settings.
Good to know, I suppose.
So what I'm going to do in this video and the next video in slightly different ways is just walk you through me pulling data into the Power Query Editor from a couple of different sources. And I'm doing it repeatedly just because I really want to sort of embed these basic steps in your brain as much as I can. I think seeing me go through that Power Query Editor and going through the steps of loading data, doing some basic transformations, and then taking the data out potentially is only going to help in the long run before we get onto some admittedly slightly more complex processes in Power Query. So what I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to pull some data from a CSV file that I've got on a folder on my desktop. I'm going to take it into the Power Query Editor. I'm going to make some adjustments to it. I'm going to transform the data and tidy it up. I know for a fact already that data has got some issues. It's got some blank rows, some duplicate values. And then I'm just going to load the data back out into my blank workbook here. So let's do each of those steps. I'm going to go to my data ribbon, go over to get data, and then I go to from file, and the second option is from text CSV. And I'm looking here at a folder that's called PQ files that I've saved on my desktop. And just to be very clear, we are pulling the file. So it's the individual file from the folder. What we'll come on to later on in this module is actually referencing the folder and then having Power Query pick up any files within the folder. So if you think ahead, what we're trying to do in lots of situations with financial modeling and especially reporting and lots of management accounting work, when we get into that step of looking at a folder and picking up multiple CSV files, those files could be each month of a financial year that you can pull into Power Query, consolidate, and then do some transformation work. But that's two steps ahead. Let's just pull this individual file for now. And what you get before you go to the Power Query Editor is you get this preview screen. And this is just giving me an example based on the first 200 rows of the data that it sees in that CSV file that I've pointed it to. So as I mentioned, I know that this data set deliberately has got some issues with it. There are some blank rows here. We've got some rows above the header of the raw data, which I'm going to need to get rid of. And there's probably a few things that I'm going to want to tweak. Like, as an example, my quantity column, my quantity field, or what will be a field, has text in it. And that's not going to be any use to me if I want to build any calculations off the back of it. So from here, what I'm doing, to be honest, all the time is going straight into transform data. I suspect you will be as well. But I'm just going to load this data, first of all, into the Excel workbook. So bear in mind, I haven't gone into the Power Query Editor at all. I just want to show you that even then, you can see that Power Query has converted that data, that raw data from the CSV file, into an Excel table. It's a huge link between Power Query and the use of Excel tables. And we still have some of that dynamic capability here. And that's really because of the intelligence of Power Query. What I mean by that is this. You can see at the moment that this data set stops at 16. In fact, it looks like there's a duplicate, so we'll sort that out when we get into the editor. Let's go over to the source file. And in here, I'm going to add some new raw data. So we'll add 4 new elements, bearing in mind that there are gaps between each of these rows. Let's change the last one to 17 so it's clear. And now I'm going to hit refresh. So when I hit refresh, what you'll see is that this table has updated. So Power Query has been able to identify that the information in that source CSV file has grown, there's more data, and it's picked it up in this Excel table. So I thought that was just quite useful to see, before we even get into the editor, what we're doing here in terms of taking data and turning it into something that's more dynamic and more useful. But actually, we want to go into the editor and we want to do some things to this raw data. And we can do that in a number of ways, and it's probably worth me just running through those. So one way you've seen already, and that is from the Data tab. And on this left-hand side in Get Data, you can launch the Power Query Editor here. Also on the right-hand side, we've got this Queries and Connections section, and I can double-click that. I won't do it yet, but I could double-click that, and that would take me into the editor as well. I can also right-click, and again, this is one of those areas, a bit like I spoke about pivot tables, where the options you get when you click the right button on the mouse are actually pretty useful. And one of the things we can do here is go through our Load To options. Also, there is a query ribbon that has appeared. So again, this is really useful. We can step into the Power Query Editor here. We can refresh. We can do actually some of the other key functions that we're going to talk about, merging and appending queries. For now, let's just go into the Power Query Editor. Okay, so we're back in here. Hopefully this is starting to look a little bit more familiar, and we have a fair amount of work to do. So let's start over on the right-hand side, because we've got as the name of the query at the moment, the name of the file, and we're going to change that. And we always start our query names. And when I say we, I just mean me and my business partner. It's not a universal convention. QRY underscore, and then let's just call this data one, just to give it any sort of name that's clear that it's a query. I can also see that we have two steps here. So the source gives me, in the formula bar, the actual text, the destination, or the location even, of where that data has come from. And that does become pretty handy. If the name of the file changes when you've been using it for a while, you can actually quite quickly make some edits here to refresh or correct that link. So we don't do anything to the source, that's fine. Change type has appeared in this, or changed type. And you'll see this almost all the time when you load data into Power Query. This is Power Query attempting to interpret the data that you have in each of your fields, and then potentially making changes to what it deems the data type in that field to be. And this is what the reference is for the data type. And at the moment, these are all showing ABC. If you click on that button, you can see that ABC is text. And there are lots of other options here, and data types are very important, and we will come back to them time after time when we go through this module. It's particularly important when you get into the realm of merging and appending queries, because you have to at some point make sure that the data types are aligned when you actually get to the point of merging those two separate queries of data. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove this step for now, and there is a bit more to talk about with things like changed type, because this is a step that generally we want to try and do towards the end of our query steps, and I'll explain why when we get onto this in a later video. Let's also just quickly check the left-hand side again, so we can see at the moment I've just got the one query, and that's now showing my updated query name. Okay, so let's make a start on tidying up this data. The first thing I'm going to do is I can see that I've got two rows at the top here that are of no use to me. I want this third row to essentially be my header row, and there's two things that I need to do. Number one, I want to go to remove rows and remove top rows. From there, I'm going to get this dialog box asking me how many rows I want to remove, so I can type in 2, hit enter, and there we go. The next thing I want to do is promote this row to be my headers, and I can go here, use first row as headers, and you can see now that that top row has now become my header row, albeit I may want to tweak some of these header descriptions at a later point in this query. There's still some work to do, so I can also see that there are blank rows in here. So remove rows again, remove blank rows, and now the dataset is starting to look a little bit more tidy. I also believe I've got some duplicate rows in here. So again, remove rows, remove duplicates, and it's removed the duplicate there. Now let's just take a step back, because that...
I guess the nice thing about, I don't use remove blank rows often, which I should, because I'll end up usually just filtering one of the columns on like remove null or remove blanks, but that's not really getting rid of like completely blank rows, so I guess that's better practice to do it that way. I'm just normally silly about it.
It did work, but it was slightly risky on my part. When you look at this, we've got a duplicate of the PO numbers here. And I just want to highlight that it's actually really important which field I have highlighted when I press that remove duplicates button. So if I were to, for example, highlight the shipped date as a different option, let's go to remove rows, remove duplicates. That's cut that down significantly because I only had 2 unique shipped dates. Let's go back one step, remove that second duplicate, go back to highlighting the first field. Now, if I use my shift key and I click on the final field, I can highlight all of my fields. And now, if I was to hit remove duplicates, it would be assessing rows across all fields as a unique item. So if I hit remove duplicates, this time it just removed one PO 00016 because actually it's assessing everything as a single item. Even though I did duplicate these 4 rows here, I forgot to duplicate the number of units. And that means that these 4 rows are actually unique as an entire row compared to the 4 above them. So I hope that makes sense. Let's go back. Actually, what I did want to do was what I did the first time. It was fine. I wanted to remove duplicates just based on the PO number. And there we go. So let's pause there and just look back at our steps. So we started off with the source. We've removed the 2 top rows. We promoted the headers. There's a changed type in there, which actually slipped my view when that happened. So we'll come back to that in 1 second. We removed the blank rows and we removed duplicates. Now, changed type has snuck in there, and I didn't see that happen. But essentially, when we promoted the headers, Power Query has actually assessed the new types. So you look at the difference here. Before we promoted those headers, everything was being interpreted as text. Once we
Side note is when I'm at my like home computer, when I'm plugged into like the dock with like an extra monitor and everything, my lag is really bad. But the lag doesn't seem bad today. None of my business, just a little spooky.
promoted the headers, Power Query added its own step. It's actually spotted that it thinks the data in these fields here are dates rather than text. So that's fine, that's okay. I think I would actually prefer to take that step out. We answer this is a warning saying, are you sure you want to delete this step? Because it's a step within others. We'll take that out. We're going to let these 2 steps then happen. So even though I've just removed the step from within my query, the next steps still follow on and there are no issues. Now that's not always the case. Sometimes if you do remove a step in the middle, you'll find that there's an issue with your remaining steps. Why have I just removed that change type? Well, this comes down to something that we will talk about as we go through this module. Even in Power Query, we're trying to keep things simple and clear and consistent. And what I tend to try and do is just change types once, if I can, right towards the end of my set of query steps. What you often see when coding in Power Query in the steps isn't applied in a really logical and simple way, is multiple change type steps. And it's just another layer in our sort of full stack approach. We're trying to keep things as logical and simple for us and others to understand. So we just take that out and we'll do all of the change types once when we get through all the other transformation steps. And there are a couple of transformations that I still have to go. So let's look at the quantity column. I would like to remove this units and just leave myself with a number here, just in case I want to do some calculations off the back of that. There are a number of ways I can do this. I'm going to go for extract. So if I go onto the transform tab, I could split the columns, but it leaves me with another column of units as text that I don't need. I'm just going to go to extract. And if you think about what I've got here, I know I've only got one number on the left-hand side of that field at the moment, but you could see an example where maybe there were 10 or more units, and then I don't have one character to pull out, I've got 2. So I'm going to use a delimiter, and I'm going to say text before the delimiter. Oh, let's try this actually at the end of my series of steps. Let's try that again. So I'm going to use extract, text before delimiter. The delimiter I'm going to use is the space. I just want a number before the space, and there we go. So that has just given me the result. It has transformed the original field. It's just got rid of that unit text completely for me. And I can still do what I was doing before. If I take a step back, it comes back, but this is what I want. I want the number. Now I could, at this point, go in and I could change the field type to a whole number. But again, I'm just going to hold fire on that for the moment. I want to make all of my transformations first, and then we'll do the change type at the end. And in fact, we may even be at that point. So I think I'm happy with everything else in terms of my fields. So let's have a go at updating these data types. Actually, there is one more step. So we have some AMs here that I do not want. And if I tried to change this to a date, I suspect, yes, we would get an error. So I need to get rid of these AMs. Great. Well, this is another example of me being able to show you the use of extract. And I'm going to go for extract text before delimiter. I think I can use my space again. Hit OK. And there we go. Both of those fields have now been updated. And now I'm going to leave the time there for the download date. That's okay. To be honest, I could just get rid of that column altogether if I wanted to, but I think the point's been made on this. Let's change these data types. I'm going to change that to a date. Change this. So also note now that we've got the changed type step. And now, even though I'm going for another separate changed type, there's still one step. It's just going to wrap all of this up into one step. And that's what I was talking about with keeping things structured and simple and clean. Rather than having 4 or 5 changed type steps as I see them and think of them, I'm just going to wrap all of my changed type steps across all of the columns I want to make those changes to into one consolidated step. There's one more. We can go to the quantity, change this to a whole number, and there we go. So I'm happy with my data set, and all I'm going to do now is go back over to close and load, and I'm going to close and load this back into Excel. And there we have it. This is my updated table of data. Having gone through all of those Power Query steps, I now have that clean or cleaner data in Excel. Let's do one final thing. So if we go back to the CSV file, this time I'm going to do a couple of things. So I'm actually going to highlight the whole set of data. I'm going to repeat it. And then right at the bottom, I'm going to add one unique extra entry. Save this, close it down. And now, if I hit refresh, it's not just refreshing the data from the CSV file. It's refreshing the data, bringing it into Power Query, and running through all those steps. And as you can see, because one of my steps was removing the duplicates in the PO numbers, it's already removed all of those extra duplicates. It's just brought through that one extra unique.
I think if I had never seen Power Query before, this shit would blow my mind. Which Power Query is wicked, so I really encourage people to get in on it. Because, again, copy and pasting is beneath us. But right now, nice little refresher. I think I need to watch the rest of, I need to zip through this so I can get to the Melissa DeCourt, like, live stream. I think she did, like, she definitely did 2 master classes, like, hour-and-a-half long, sessions, and she's literally so wicked. And I think there's a guy named Shandeep, and he just wrote a book as well. But yeah, they're the masters of Power Query. I am not worthy.
Entry. So there we go. You will find the CSV file below. You will find this starting template. And my challenge to you now is to replicate everything that you've just seen me do. I'd like you to take that CSV.
I am not replicating everything you just did. Sorry about it. I'm the worst.
Okay, in this video, I'm going to do something very similar to the process you saw me follow in the last video. I'm going to pull in some data into Power Query. I'm going to transform it a bit, and then I'm going to load it into Excel. And this time, I'm getting the data from a website. I'm getting the top 250 ranked films from IMDb, and I'm going to load it into a pivot table when I come back out of Power Query towards the end of this video. You'll find this starting file in the section below this video, and you'll find at the top of the Query tab this web address, and this is what we're going to use. So on my data ribbon, go to Get Data from Other Sources. I'm going to go to From Web. And then from this section here that pops up, I can paste in that web link and hit OK. And what I get is this screen. Now, this means that Power Query is looking at that website, and it's giving me these options. And turning on the website, you'll see a number of different layers that you can look at, and you get a preview of the data that will be coming through if you go ahead. I'm interested in Table 0. It doesn't really matter about the name. What does matter is that I can see a preview of the data that I'm getting, and this is what I want. It's the top ranked films. I've got the ranking. I've got some data that I'm probably going to want to get rid of when I get into Power Query, and I've got the rank and the name of the film and the date all in one field. So let's transform that data straight away. We're going to go straight into the Power Query editor. Okay, so from here, what I'm going to do is just have a quick look at the data. So there's some bits in here that I want, and there's some bits that I don't think are too much use to me. What I can see
Love the idea of taking it from the web. What I don't fear, but I'm more so, I run into issues as like password protected sites, or I've got some Google Sheets business that I could probably pull in here from like one of our clients, but yeah.
see is that at the very least the headers look to be good. What else have we got here? So I think I can get rid of this change type step. I'm going to hold on to my rank and title column, and I'm going to hold on to my IMDb rating column, and I want
Ooh, or I wonder if I could pull like Amazon rankings for certain items. I'll try that next week.
to get rid of all of the others. That's even in itself is quite an important decision. What I'm going to be doing is choosing the remove other columns tool here. The reason why that's important is if this data changes on the IMD website for any reason, let's say they add some other fields, by clicking remove other columns, I'm essentially picking the ones that I want to keep, and it sort of future-proofs this process a little bit. If I was to go the other way and select all of the fields, all of the columns that I don't want, and click remove columns, well, if this field changes, if it's added to in any way, then suddenly I'm going to be left with other data fields that I may not want. So I'm going to click back on the two that I want, and I'm going to click remove other columns. Okay, so my data is certainly looking cleaner straight away.
Okay, that was important. That was very important. Remove other columns. I hate that I didn't know that. Ugh, makes me sick. Okay, like he just said, to reiterate, if you are putting in your query steps and you delete all the columns you don't want, it's always going to be looking for those column headers. So if those ever get removed from your like primary data source, it's gonna fuck your shit up later, for lack of a better word. But if you just select the ones you do want and remove other columns, then it's only going to look for things you want, which are probably going to stay there anyway. And it's going to remove any other nonsense that comes in. God, I hate that I found that out now. I just did a huge Power Query project last month, and that's actually very helpful because there's people that kind of add and subtract things from Power like databases all the time. So back to basics is always worth it. I'm so tired.
But there's more that I want to do. I want to separate three elements from within this rank and title field. I want the ranking and I want the date. So we'll go through that step by step. And here's how I would do it.
But yeah, I just want to reiterate. Every time you go through the basics, it always feels silly, but there's always little things that you pick up that you're like, it is like such a painstaking process to like really dive through the old stuff. But it's just one of those moments where you really have to kick yourself and you're like, why don't I just go back to basics often? Because I've got an ego. It's so annoying.
Firstly, you've got to think about when you split some field of data like this, is there an element of consistency across each of the rows? What I mean by that is if I try to, for example, delimit by a space going from the left for some reason, well, if you look through this, there are different numbers of spaces for each of these entries. What I do know is that counting from the right-hand side, it looks like I will always just extract the date within brackets if I count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 characters from the right-hand side. And that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to go to split column. I'm going to split by number of characters. I'm going to say I want to split once as far right as possible, and I want to count 6 characters. And that's done two things. Firstly, it has separated out the date, but a step has been added that I don't want. That is converting that date that was in brackets into a negative number. It's interpreted the brackets as a negative, and it's converted this to a number. And I don't want that step. That's easy. I can just click that cross when we get back to having brackets. But I don't want the brackets. So this is all really quite straightforward when you look at it. I'm going to transform that data, and I'm going to go to extract. And this time I'm going to choose text between delimiters. The starting delimiter I want is the open brackets. The end delimiter is the closing brackets. Press enter. And I'm left with the date. Remember, because I'm on transform, it is just transforming that source field, not in Excel, just in here. So those brackets are now lost. The next thing that I want to do is I want to separate out the ranking here. Now, we looked at the index option up here, and I probably could use that, but I'm just going to carry on showing you how I'm using some of the other functions in here to separate some of my text in Power Query. So I'm going to want to split my column again, and I'm going to go up to my split column option. I want to pick a delimiter again, and part of my thinking there is I can't really use the position because the number of characters that my number represents changes across the rows here. What I do have is a full stop, a dot, and then a space, neither of which I want, but that is consistent, it seems, throughout all of my data there. So I'm going to use a delimiter, I'm going to pick the leftmost delimiter, and I'm going to choose dot space as that delimiter. And when I hit enter, hopefully, what you see is we have the rank, the number that's been pulled out, and then we have the film title left here. And what I'm going to do quickly is I'm going to change some of these headers because these aren't that great anymore. This one in particular is just wrong. So we'll call this, you can double click, I'll call this IMDb rank. Let's call this title, film.
So, important thing that he just did, because he went and changed the names of them, it added the rename column step, where when I watched Melissa DeCourt's, I think I messed up her name, when Melissa did her very wonderful presentation, she showed how you can go into the previous step, like the change type step, and like change the names there. Or like being able to like rename it in the same step that you're doing stuff, so it really cleans up your applied steps. Because a lot of the times your applied steps get so fucking outrageous, and overwhelming, and it is really like it's a good data hygiene practice. I'm sure that's what he's about to say here.
Clear film title. We'll just call this year, and then IMDb rating. I'm pretty happy with that. That's taken me all of about 2 minutes to bring that data in, pull it apart in the way that I want it to. And what I can now do quite quickly, I suspect, is load that into a pivot table and just at this stage, produce a very basic but quite dynamic and meaningful pivot table report. So I'm going to go to the home ribbon, close and load to, and this time we're going to choose a pivot table report. And we'll just do this on the existing worksheet, that's fine. So here we are back in our pivot table view with the report section on the left and the fields and these 4 areas on the right-hand side. And I have got the fields from my Power Query data that I've just been updating. And all I'm going to do, just to keep this simple for now, is I'm going to start with the ranking. In fact, let's do something different. Let's do the rating. Put the rating in. Okay, that's ordered it from lowest to highest. Right-click, sort. Let's go the other way. Let's have the highest rated films first. And then I'll put the title underneath. And actually, I would like to see the ranking as well. Remember in the pivot table module, we talked about the different views that you can have with your pivot tables. This, for me, isn't as nice as we can make it. So I'm going to go to Design, Report Layout, Tabular Form, which still doesn't look great like this. I'm going to remove all subtotals. Double click on this so we get the title. Let's shrink that down. There we go. So I appreciate we could probably spend a bit longer tidying this up. That's not very nice, is it? Let's pick something that's a little bit meaningful. There we go, that'll do. So in 5 minutes, I think, we have created a link to the IMDb website. We've pulled in the top 250 ranked films into Power Query. We've transformed that data just a little bit so that it gives us a little bit more meaning. And then we've loaded that out into a pivot table in it. So what we're going to do in this video is a step up in complexity, and rather than picking a file from a folder, this time we're going to be pointing Power Query to a folder. And as long as we've set up our files within our folder the right way, it will pull through all of the data from all of those files into Power Query and allow us to make edits, make transformations, enrich that data across the whole data set, which is really powerful when you think of things like perhaps having a set of TBs or P&L reports from an accounting system saved into one folder. And that's actually the example we're going to look at. We've got a set of very, very simple P&L files, and that's actually the example we're going to look at. Each of these are a month end, and the first thing you'll see here is that we've used a naming convention that includes the month end date within the file name. That's really important. If we look in one of these CSV files, what you'll see is that there's nothing in here in the data to help us get to the date. And that means that when we get into Power Query, we need something to help us tag, to help us identify what each of those files is in terms of the date reference. So this is our data set. We've got 12 months of 2017 and we've got 5 months of 2018. And I'm going to go ahead and start to use Power Query to look at that folder, and then we'll step into the Power Query editor. So we go to Data, as usual, Get Data on the left-hand side, From File, and this time I want the option at the bottom, From Folder. Okay, we get this folder path dialog section here. I'm going to go to Browse. I know that this is on my desktop, Source Files. Click OK. And we get this screen here in front of us. And we've got these options, some of which you would have seen before when we were just looking at a file. But this is slightly different. So what we're being given here is essentially a list of all of the files from within that folder. So this is a table of data just giving us information about each of those individual files. What we don't want to do this time is use transform or load. So if you think of what these were doing before, transform data will take us straight into the Power Query editor. Load and the drop downs here will essentially allow us to load the data straight into Excel or into a pivot table or a chart. But load and transform data here will just load this data. They'll just load the summary of the files that are in that folder. They don't give you any reference to the actual data within the files. So those two are actually a little bit useless to us in this instance, unless for some reason we found this summary really useful. What we want is to use this combine button, and that's a word that we'll come back to quite a few times in this video. We are trying to combine our data from our individual files. And if we click on that right-hand drop-down, we've got some very familiar options to us here. So combine and transform data will take us into the Power Query editor straight away. Combine and load will literally just drop the data straight into Excel, into a table from all of the files. And combine and load to gives us that option to actually load it into Excel, but maybe as a pivot table or a pivot chart or as a connection only. What we want to do is choose combine and transform data because there's quite a few things that we're going to want to do to that very raw data set. But before we get there, we are then presented with this information. And there's just a couple of things that I want to point out here. First is that we've got this idea of a sample file, and this is crucial when we look at Power Query and pulling data from multiple files in a folder. This is telling us that a sample file has been chosen, and it's picked the first file from within that folder, and it's just giving us a preview of what that data looks like. We've also got this data type detection based on the first 200 rows, so that's allowing Power Query to try to identify what the data types are across our fields. So I'm going to leave that on, although to be honest, when we get into Power Query Editor, I'm probably going to remove that data type detection step, change types that we've seen a few times. I'm just going to click OK just to get into the Power Query Editor. So here we are in the editor, and everything should look pretty familiar now. We've got the applied steps for a query on the right-hand side. We've got the ribbons at the top, and we've got what's called the navigator bar on the left-hand side. But there is a lot more here on this left-hand side this time, and really that's where I want to focus our attention in on, because if you can get your head around what's happening here, you've pretty much mastered the process of using Power Query to pull and transform multiple files from a folder. This time, there are two things going on here. And if I collapse these down to their minimum groups, what you'll see is two sections: transform file from source files and other queries. And let's just expand these two back out here. these are the two queries here, one called source files, one called transform sample file. You can tell by this icon on the left-hand side. So these are the two queries. The top half is essentially a process of Power Query picking a sample file from your folder and then allowing you in here, in this query, to apply a number of steps. Once you've finished with those steps and you move to this query, essentially what Power Query then does is it takes all of the files from your folder and applies those steps that you set up here to all of the files. So this is a crucial additional step, and it looks more complicated because firstly we've got some extra bits here, and also when you look at the source files query, there's already a huge number of steps in here which we'll come on to a bit later. But what I would just try to get your head around is, step one is you need to apply a set of steps to the sample file that you intend to then be repeated across all of the files. Step two then, if you need to, is to then make changes on this second query. Now, general best practice is that you should apply as many steps as you can in this first query. It's more efficient, but there is one area where we're going to need to do something on this second query after all of those transformations have happened across all of the files, and it's something to do with this source name field, but we will come back to that later. Now, even though we're in Power Query and not native Excel, we always try to stick to our best practice and trying to keep things clear and simple and consistent. So the first thing I want to do is rename my two queries so that it's crystal clear to me what these are doing. And I'm going to call this QRY underscore transform sample file. And I'm going to tell myself what it is. And this is really thinking ahead to perhaps a situation when we have more than one transformation set of queries going on. So this is transform sample file underscore actuals. Let's minimize that. Perfect. And I'm going to call my second query QRY underscore combine underscore actuals. That to me straight away is just much, much clearer in terms of what these two queries do. And I promise you, when you get into the realms of having 5, 6, 7, 10 queries, it really, really helps to be quite pedantic in this area of naming conventions. So let's now step into this section where we're doing stuff to a sample file in a bit more detail, because there's a few things going on here. I actually don't want you to focus in on these elements here. All I will say is that this is a process of identifying the sample file. All I want to do for the moment is just focus in on this query and just the starting point that has clearly brought through that CSV data in its raw format. And really from here, the next step is to just do exactly what we were doing before when we were dealing with a file, and that is to go through those steps of tidying up my data. So the first thing I can do, again, is remove my top rows. Top 2 rows will take out. I'm going to promote my column headers. I'm going to remove my blank rows. And the only other thing I can see here, actually, is I've got some totals in here. I don't want those. And I can use the filter button here. If I scroll all the way down, if I untick that total, you can see there that that removes the total, and that's become a step in there. So that filtering process is just like anything else, and that will be applied across all of the other files when we get into this second query. Okay, is there anything else? Yeah, I've got some columns that I'm not happy with, so highlight the 3 columns that I want. I'll remove other columns, and that's looking pretty good. Now, I think I'm actually happy with the data types, but I could probably change the account here to a number. It does actually work as well if you're referencing text for an account number, you just have to be consistent. But I'm not going to do that here, actually. Again, change type, there is a sneaky change type that has slipped in here. This is probably my biggest...
This is a good thing to learn. My brain is on negative 100% right now. I don't often work with like a bunch of dump files in one place. However, I can see infinite usage of it, but that's where I would almost pressure the company to use better database management, but not all companies can do that, I guess. I don't know. I'm really impartial on I'm like, maybe for like budget, I don't know. I can see application of this, just I would never want it a part of my day-to-day, to be honest. It's cool that it can be done though.
Failure in Power Query is that I don't spot when Power Query adds a changed type step. So let's just go back here. What's happened? It has changed type to text. Oh, there we go. So my value here has been changed to a number. I'm just going to take that out because really, again, if you think back to this best practice, I want the change type to happen in one place at one time if possible. And I want that to happen here right at the end when I've done anything else that I want to do to my data. Again, that might seem really pedantic and it's not something you have to follow to the letter. It's just something that me and my business partner have always done, trying to minimize the steps across all of our queries. So really, I should have spotted that change type a bit sooner, but like I say, that's probably the biggest thing I've got to work on. So let's go back to the final step. We've removed those columns. I'm pretty happy with that. So now let's have a look at the other query. And already you can see that there's a symbol here that makes me a little bit worried, or would do, and that's a warning symbol that we've got an error. This is what it looks like when there's an issue with your steps for some reason. So I'm being told quite clearly here, the column 1 of the table wasn't found. And if we click back, you can very clearly see that that error crops up just on that final step there, another changed type. And if we look back at this query, where we ended up was there is no column 1. There's no field here with that description anymore. So that's why we've got this error. And in this case, it's as simple as me just deleting that changed type step, and now we're absolutely fine. And we do have all of these steps that have been put in automatically by Power Query. And again, this is one of those areas I don't want to go into too much detail here, but if you just follow what we see on screen, what you'll see is we start from that overview table of all of the files within the folder. And as we step through, you'll see that essentially we are getting to the point where that table of data, the information within each of those files is expanded out in here. This really then is this consolidated or combined set of data from all of our individual files in one table of data. there's one more key step that I need to work through, and this is the part that I have to apply in this second query, and it's something to do with the source name. I want to pull the date, the month-end date, from this source name. The reason why I can't do it in the earlier query is because this was just based on a sample. It's only at this point, when we're combining all of those individual files, that we actually get the source name of the file coming through from Power Query. And this just becomes another step similar to what we've done before. I could replace values here, and this is probably one of the quickest ways to do it. So I want to get rid of the PL, try again, get rid of the PL space. Okay, I'm going to get rid of the .csv. I'm just replacing these with 0, that's why it's working. Okay, and the only remaining step now, I think, is to finally apply my change types to all of my data types here. So this is a date.
I think I forget the little things like that when, like, I think I over rely on calculated columns instead of like the buttons that live there.
Generally, you want to change this data type. ABC123 is just a generic data type that's applied. So for anything like this, you could actually have a text or a number. I'll put this to a whole number for the account. The description we're going to put in text, and the value we're going to put into a decimal number. And that almost takes me to the point where I'm ready to load this into Excel. I just want to make one more change, and that's to update the name of this field to month. Rename columns is my final step. And from there, I can go up to the top left and close and load back into Excel. And what I've got now is all of that data from all of those individual files, and it's all been transformed in the same way. If we go down to the bottom of the table, and I appreciate at the moment this isn't in dates order, but if I just go down to the bottom and I turn to an extra file that I've got, let's put that extra file into my source files. We go back over to Excel. If I hit refresh, you'll see that we get that extra data coming through. And it's all been through the sample transformation steps, and then that additional step in the second query of putting out the date and just tidying up some of the field types and the field names. So you'll find the folder with the files that I've shown you on screen below this video. I would suggest you save that folder to your desktop just like I did, and have a go at completing the exact steps that I've just gone through.
Okay. We're just gonna do a little housekeeping. Okay, thank you so much for coming. What a chaotic little episode. I'm proud of myself for showing up, even though I'm in London, it's midnight, and I didn't want to do it. Proud of myself for going back to basics and learning something. I think viewing the column distribution was interesting. Column from examples, the locale on dates is interesting, like regional settings. Removing other columns was huge. And I know how many queries I'm going to have to go fix with that. And then, thank you, Jody, for sticking around. And loading data from a folder, I'm going to chew on. I think I'm going to try and watch more YouTube videos because today was really chaotic. Anyways, if you'd like to submit your goals to Office Hours with Amber, there is a link. There's going to be some sort of link in the bio. It's a Microsoft form. Basically, by submitting your form, you get added to the monthly Zoom call. You get a cute little template. You get added to the Discord, or at least an invite to the Discord. I encourage, because I've done more in the last 5 weeks than I would have without the community involvement. We had our community Zoom call last week, and it was really nice to talk to everyone about their goals, pros, woes, insights, and I got the chance to ask everyone some silly questions. But yeah, Power Query is wicked. If you haven't learned about Power Query yet, I fully advocate for it because it literally is so huge for administrative automation, especially if you're doing the same stuff over and over again, especially if other people are interacting with your data. It's the easiest way. If you don't know Power Query exists, you'd never accidentally stumble your way into it. And I think it's a really good way to bulletproof your data manipulations, especially if there's other people that are messing around with formulas. I could preach it all day long, but I think I'm gonna have to get a little creative with application next week. I think if anything, it might be just going back to Power Queries I've already made and modernizing them, or seeing how minimal, I think it would be a cool example to see how many original applied steps I have and how many I can get it down to, or how many queries I can remove. I think that's going to be a cool challenge for myself, but I think I need a nap. Today was just good enough. There's so many audio issues and the Wi-Fi and the video, but we're just going to keep doing it ugly. then it'll get better. But yeah, I think I never know if the stop streaming is going to stop it immediately or if there's going to be some lag time. So this is my time of saying goodbye. Good night, everyone. I'll have cool updates on the Global Excel Summit for you next Monday. Hopefully, if I make it home in time, I feel like I will.